Hi, and welcome back to our Gait for Human Potential video series. I'm Carol Montgomery, physical therapist, somatic educator, and integral human gait expert. If you have pain in your knees, or maybe have trouble trusting your leg to stand on when you're walking because you have knee pain, or maybe it feels like it's going to buckle and give way, or maybe you're the type of person who's always looking for a place to sit down because either your leg hurts or is tired or your back hurts or just doesn't feel like it can support you much longer, then this video is for you. The name of our movement exploration today is called Seated Strap Stretch. That name pretty much sums up what we will be doing and what it is that you'll be needing. First of all, you'll need a chair, something that is quite supportive on the chair seat itself so that it doesn't sink down. The other thing that you will need is some kind of strap, and let me coach you through what kind of strap that you'll need. Something that is rather firm, like a belt of some sort. It could be what we use in class is like a cotton sheet that we've torn into strips, and so we use that. The sheet doesn't give, as opposed to something that is like a stretchy band. We don't want to use a stretchy band. You could also use actually a scarf that you would wear around your neck if it's long enough. Again, it will not stretch or give. All right? I'll give you a moment while you try to find both those items, a chair and a strap. I also want to remind you at the end of the video, I'll be sharing with you some anatomical and biomechanical gems that I think are important in this seated strap stretch. Some you may be familiar with, and I think there are a few there that may surprise you. Like most of our movement explorations, we begin with a pre-assessment, and we'll repeat this at the end of our movement. Now, we do this so that you can start to develop the muscle of awareness, so that you can be able to attend to what went on before and what is different afterwards. Because we know that once you start to become awake or conscious to what is different, you personally can start to make different choices in how you move that will then in turn impact not only your gait, but all function. So let's begin first with that pre-assessment. So if you're sitting and you found your strap, please come to standing. The first thing I want you to notice as you're standing is the weightedness between one foot and the other foot. In other words, which foot feels heavier or which imprint would be a little bit more deeper into the floor. Good. Now, often when we're trying to do a pre-assessment and we're trying to build this muscle of awareness, sometimes it's very difficult to get a sense of really feeling which side is heavier or not. And that's natural. So if you can't feel which side feels like it's a deeper imprint, here's another way that you might consider. If you were going to pick up one foot would be just a little lighter, and it would signal that you could be more easily lifted from the ground. You could try it if you want to. Okay? Just a little bit. It doesn't have to be much. And when you lift that foot from the ground, there's immediate and opposite response of pressure going down into more of the standing foot. That's not lifting. I want you to start to get this concept of, it reminds me of a teeter-totter. I don't know if that's helpful for you or not. Not many more teeter-totters are left on the playgrounds, but you know that action of where one end goes up and the opposite end goes down. Good. Now, walk in place, maybe 3, 4 steps. You're not moving anywhere, just walk in place. When we walk in place, it just kind of signals to the brain that you're actually going to be walking forward, or in this pre-assessment, I just want to clear your slate. Start fresh in your awareness. Pause. Look down at your feet. Notice the distance between the feet. We'll just keep that in our mind. So we'll compare that to later. And then go back and see if you have more clarity of which foot feels a little heavier into the ground. And now I want to break that down a little further. So it's not only which foot is into the ground, but start to notice on that foot that's in the ground. If you have a tendency, if I'm going to show you the foot here, okay? So the foot has a back part, which you would know it as the heel. And the heel is quite long, actually. It's as long as my finger. Most people don't realize that, but the length of your heel is quite long. So have a sense, are you standing more in the back part of the foot, which would we call the heel? And of course, from the heel comes the arch. And then the next part of the body that we see is actually of the foot is the ball of the foot. It's where the toes themselves, they actually end at the ball, the beginning of the ball of the foot. So I want you to ask yourself, if you had to give yourself a number, is it 50-50, bearing weight on the heel and the ball? Or are you more someone who is bearing weight through the toes? The toes start to curl and hang on. Or is there more weight forward into the ball of the foot? I want you to give it a number. Maybe it's 70-30 or 50-50 or 60-40. You could just whatever number that would work for you. That gives you the sensation, am I more in the front of my foot or I'm more in the back of the foot? For a lot of people, sometimes they may be in the back, but they're really heavy along one side, like the outside of the whole foot. For some people, they may feel like they're more flattened or really bearing weight more on this great toe side. Whatever it is for you, just notice it. We're going to log it in our memory, and we'll come back after the movement exploration to see if it's changed. In this seated strap stretch, there are 3 different aspects to this movement exploration. We're going to discover each of them individually, and then we'll be combining them. So the first is what we're going to do with the strap. We're going to take the strap, and you want to find the middle of your belt or your scarf or your piece of cloth. And then we're going to take the middle of that cloth and we're going to place it around the ball of the foot. Now, the foot that we're going to choose is the one that was a little heavier on the in the standing position. Okay, so my footprint, in other words, was heavier on that side. And for some of you who are practitioners watching this, when you have someone who chronically, like myself, or you might know someone that you're working with, when they put more of their weight into one foot more than the other, that is a signal to you that their center of mass has translated to the left or right of center. Usually it will be towards the side that the leg is weighted on. So that's just a kind of a practitioner tip that might be helpful. So you want to take the center of your cloth. You're going to lasso the ball of the foot. So it's not really the toes, but the ball of the foot. And you want to scoot to the forward edge of your chair. And you're going to extend the foot onto the ground. Okay? So a lot of people have a tendency when we start to hold onto a strap, it's kind of like reins of a horse, and they think that we're going to do this motion, which is, and join me with this, right? You could lift your leg up, straighten the knee, you could lean back. That's a great move, but it is not the move that we are looking for in this movement exploration. So what's going to happen? Lasso the ball of the foot, straighten the knee that has the strap around the ball of the foot. And the other knee is actually bent. And you can start to see my foot right down here is underneath my knee. Okay, so that's what it looks like from a side view. And I'm sitting up tall. And so if I look straight on, once again, I am holding on to the strap. My elbows are slightly bent, so I take all the tension up in the strap. And when I take all the tension up in the strap, it has a tendency to flex or pull my foot towards its shin bone. So now I've got a 90-degree angle at the ankle. My knee is relatively straight. Now, it's real important here that we don't hyperextend the knee. So by hyperextending the knee, that means pushing the knee back and towards the floor further than just this zero or straight angle. So if you can do that, fine, but that's not what I'm asking here. We need that knee to be at zero. And if you take a look at this skeletal example, you'll see that this is what it looks like when you hyperextend the knee. And this is what a knee looks like when it is straight or zero. Now, I know that there are some of you who are doing this seated strap stretch who actually have lost their ability to straighten the knee. It stays in a bend, or what we would call flexion. So for you, particularly if you had a total joint replacement that you're trying to get your knee extension, or if you're trying to do your prehab before you do your rehab and your surgery, then they probably have given you some kind of exercise to straighten the knee. So this is a wonderful movement for that prehab exercise. So for you folks who are looking at this and you can't straighten your knee out all the way, I want you to go to the level that you're able to. Okay? So I can straighten my knee all the way down. My foot, I've lassoed the ball of my foot. I'm holding on each ends of the strap and I'm sitting up tall. All right? Now that's the first part. Now let me show you the second part of this exercise. It's the part that actually we're going to be moving. So we want to be able to target the motion to move at the hip joint rather than at the waist or the top of the pelvis or what is called the lumbar spine. Later on, after the movement exploration in our anatomical and biomechanical pearls, I'll explain to you this connection between the lumbar spine and the knee itself. But for right now, I want to teach you how and where we're going to move from. So when your knee and leg is in that extended position, I want you to imagine that you have a dowel rod or a stick that really allows you to get this sense of being very vertical in your trunk. And then you have your thigh, and the thigh itself is connected here at the side of the what we would call the true hip. And so what happens is you can see the dowel rod is in alignment with my thigh, and my trunk is in alignment with this top dowel rod. If I stay incredibly tall and I start to lean forward, you can start to see that the angle between the torso and the thigh starts to change. It starts to have a sense of fold right here of what we would call the hip joint. So my pelvis is moving over my extended leg. Now that's very different than when I start to pull with the strap and I start to round in my back. So you can start to see that I start to kind of lean back, or my in curve here, this starts to push back towards the wall behind me, and my belly starts to shorten. So what I'm trying to do is to say, can you stay extremely long and stacked in this area so that the dowel rod on the side is long, and that if I start to bend forward, I'm not going to go or be able to go very far actually, but I do not change the shape of my low back. And I want to give you just a quick another indicator that you can do to make sure that that does not change. And this is a reference point of a line that we talk about in another movement exploration. It's called the breastbone, belly button, pubic bone line. And we will do another movement exploration later. You can look that one up. And you can be able to manipulate this invisible line that connects those three anatomical parts, and you can make that invisible line but move these parts closer together or further apart by, in your imagination, imagining a line that connects those 3 points. We can shorten the line or we can lengthen the line. So when we do the seated strap stretch and our leg is extended and we're holding onto our strap, what we're really looking and sensing is, can this line in front stay level? Can it stay so stacked that it doesn't fold, it doesn't have any ripples in it, it stays very long as you are bending forward. That's what we're looking for. And that, for some people, help give them another sensation or a cue of what it is they're doing at the back. And so when you have that line present and you stay long and stacked, what you're really doing is you're transferring, the movement is being initiated through the hip joint. All right, so let's put number 1 and number 2 together. So number 1, find the center of the strap. Take the center of the strap and place it around the ball of the foot. Hold the ends of the strap. Make sure you're forward to the edge of your seat. Sit tall and pull on the straps just a little so that the foot itself is at that 90-degree angle. The heel will never leave the ground. The heel always stays there. Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2, we're going to start to have a little tug or pull. So I'm going to exaggerate for the video this kind of pulling of the strap, and it pulls my foot up towards my shin bone even more. And I don't let my knee bend or pop up, or I don't let my knee hyperextend. It stays just right. It's kind of like a Goldilocks moment, right in the middle. So I'm actually pulling with my shoulder blades. You can start to see that my back starts to move in such a way that my blades come together, But I'm careful that even though my shoulder blades are coming together, I'm not really incurving or overarching my back, because remember, I have this breastbone, belly button, pubic bone line that is all stacked. So if you have a tendency, if this hurts you in your low back or across this area of my brown shirt and my black pants, in that area of the lumbar spine, just think of taking the line from the pubic bone to the belly button and just pull that up. So you can not just pull with your hands, but with your tummy muscles, just kind of pull that line a little shorter so you can sit tall without overarching. Sit tall without overarching. All right? So we would begin to pull ourselves forward, and we could start to feel that there's a definitely pull in the back of my calf, maybe the knee, maybe the thigh. I can pull and I could hold it. Okay, that's part 2, right? And actually, this originally comes from, in my training in physical therapy, we give that strap stretch to many, many people in their rehab, whether it's tight hamstrings, tight heel cords, like I said, for prehab of the, if you need a new hip or a new ankle, or if you need a new knee, that strap stretch is used. But I got to tell you, it wasn't until I experienced my own level of knee pain and got to the point where I have to end up having surgery because I had something that broke away and got caught in between not just my 2 bones, but underneath my kneecap. And I began to understand this movement so much more intimately as it relates to being able to put weight through the leg as in walking. So I want to show you something that translates that movement of just stretching into walking and being able to signal to the brain that you can translate your center of mass or your pelvis over that leg so it's safe enough for it's going to hold you and not give out so you can take another step. So here is the difference that made for not only me, but it's something that I teach all the time with my clients, and I dare say I wish every physical therapist could instruct this to their patients. And so it has to do with the third part of this movement, because there's one more movement that we need to do in order to signal to the brain that you are confident in standing in that leg. Maybe not you personally, but you're neurologically and biomechanically are confident in being able to stand in that leg. Now let me walk you through what that movement's going to be. So you're going to put your strap down. You can rest it on your lap. That's just fine. And let's take a look at this third component. Now allow yourself to sit in your chair in such a way as though that you feel supported by the back of the chair. And one of the movements that we are going to learn how to do is to walk to the forward part of our chair, because embedded in that movement is that third component of the seated strap stretch that we need to master, we need to make more available. This allows the seated strap movement to translate what we do in sitting to what is needed in standing and being able to walk. So first thing is we're going to start to lean to one side as though that we could take our sit bones and start to buttock walk forward to the front part of our chair. Okay? So my hands are an indicator of where the sit bones would sit and make contact with the chair seat. So if you take a closer look at what I mean by sit bones, or what we would call the ischial tuberosity, let me show you anatomically what I'm referring to here. You're looking at the pelvis from a back view. The belly would be facing the wall in front of us. You see 4 bony areas making contact on the black chair. The 2 in the middle that have a round-looking eye shape, those are your left and right sit bones. And then on the other side of each of those sit bones are actually your thigh bone or the femur. When you're sitting in a chair, you're most aware of your seat because of your thigh bones. That's what kind of gives you a sense of width and what most people think are their sit bones. But the sit bone itself is much more central or toward the center. There always will be inside of the thigh bone itself. So if you reach down and you put your hand on your thigh bone and you move towards the center, you'll find a little space, and the next bony area will be the sit bone. So now you know what I'm referring to when we talk about the sit bone. And so the sit bone itself is the weight is being translated to one side, and that's what allows the other side to be in the air and move. You also might notice that the length of the thigh itself moves back if we're heading towards the back of the chair seat, or if I'm going to the forward part of the chair seat, one thigh grows long and then the other thigh grows long. That's another way, if you look down at your thigh bones, you can actually start to sense that the sit bones are moving. So I want to give you a key indicator of how do you know your sit bones are moving. One of those indicators is that we visually see your torso and your head start to move from one side to the other. And there's just several different ways that you can make that movement happen. So I can actually do this, and you can join me. I have one hand on my chest. I have one hand on my belly button, and the hand is spread really wide. And I'm just leaning to one side, back and forth. It looks like an upside down pendulum, or the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I guess that's another way. Certainly this way of leaning over has me bearing weight into the sit bone, and this sit bone is light. But there's something very interesting happening with alongside my torso. When I lean to this side, relatively the torso on the side feels a little more compressed or shortened, all right? This side feels like it's a little bit long, all right? This is actually one way to butt walk, and it's also one way to lighten the sit bones. It's not a bad way, it's just a way. But that type of lean does not translate into walking efficiently, I should say. Now, I have seen people walk like that, and that's when people either need a new hip, or you will see them walk and they lean into the side that they are stepping on. They could have a lot of pain, or they could have just simply lost range of motion somewhere along their chain. They could have just hip musculature weakness that causes that little tick-tock in the movement when you see them walk upright. It's harder on the body, for sure. It takes much more energy, and also other parts get impacted with that kind of motion and movement. that can lead to further some type of disease like osteoarthritis or tendonitis. So I want to give you a second option when we go to butt walk forward or when we are trying to stack or lean our sit bones to one side. So let's walk forward again to the front part of the seat. Feet are down on the floor. I'm going to have you move the feet slightly to your left. Okay, I'll mirror you here. Now, what I'm going to do is I want to kind of get an experience of being able to push down with the foot on the outside. And so in this case, this foot is pressing down and it shifts me over onto my sit bone over here. So it's like the middle of me here is being lassoed or drawn across rather than this lean. So feel how it's a very different movement. When I just lean to this side, this outside leg has no participation in the movement. I can just lean over and this leg can be very light. Okay? I might use this if I were going to perhaps step over a gate or step really wide into something. But it is not what we're looking for that organizes the torso or the trunk. So let's try this. So again, pushing with the foot. It could be a little bit more ball of the foot. The arch of the foot is pressing down. That causes this sit bone to lift. Now, you would know this pattern of pressing and lifting, and you can start to see this kind of curving that goes on. This tends to scoop out. The side that I'm sitting on, the torso gets really long. You would know this movement as in toilet care if you were going to wipe your own rear end. So it's there probably more often than you think, right? You would know it if you were going to allow yourself to shave the back of the leg. Maybe that you do that, or maybe wash the bottom of the heel. So it has a lot of roles that it can translate into function. So the press initiates the lift of the sit bone, and at the same time that press and the lifting, there's this kind of curvature, this backward C arcing that allows us to stack up over the leg. It's this movement right here is the key movement. It's so unique in a seated position. When you combine it with the strap stretch, it is the thing that translates to our brain that this is a standing leg in upright and in walking. Okay? It is the signal to the brain that allows this leg to at one time will let go so that you can advance to the next step, and so that there's the least amount of potential that you would fall doing the tick-tock or the leaning of the whole torso. So we want to capture this downward press of the foot that leads to a lightness of the sit bone, so the pelvis is actually tilted and there's an equal and opposite response of the spine that curves, the head that stays on the torso, and there's a little slight tilt. All right? So that's the movement of as we do step 1 to find the middle and lasso, as we do step 2 to sit up tall and to keep this line in front of us from the breastbone, belly button, pubic bone really long. And then the third aspect is how can we press the foot down in order for the pelvis to tilt, in order for our whole sense of self is stacking up over this sit bone. And the torso and the head, the middle of your spine is actually stacking up on that sit bone. It's only then that we would pull the strap and bring us forward. And if you get this right, and right here is probably a poor choice of words, but if you get the synergy of these three components harmoniously moving together, that's a better way of saying that, then it's going to translate into the brain walking, but you will not be moving really that far forward. And the movement itself will be centered in the hip joint. So now, as you can see in the anatomical model, now we are going to have a pelvis, a socket moving on the ball. And it's not just both sockets moving on the ball, it's one socket being tipped and also then moving forward and backward on a sit bone. So now let's put all three components together and let's experience what this movement is all about. So you find the center of your strap. Walk forward to the front part of your chair. Take the center of that strap and lasso your foot. Now I'm going to turn myself to this side. So you are sitting up tall. Your knee itself is as extended as it comfortably can for those of you who have normally a bent knee, or for those of you who could hyperextend the knee. Remember, we're trying to get as neutral as possible. Okay? So we're going to sit up tall. So already I'm stacking over 2 sit bones. I take up the slack in my strap, so my foot is at a 90-degree angle, my knee is relatively straight, and my hip, the way this chair is situated, my torso is lined up right over my hip. And I'm going to take the slack out of the strap, and now I feel like my arms are engaged, and it's going to be easy for me to pull with my upper shoulder girdle to make this movement. And now here's our third component. Begin to find how you can press down with the foot that's standing on the floor, the footprint. How can you start to push into the ground that allows you to stack up and over your sit bone? Remember, there were 3 ways. Remember, we're looking for the stacking that causes the response of the spine to curve versus the response of the torso just tipping over. Okay? So no leaning tower of Pisa. We want to be so upright that we look like the backward letter C. Okay? Now from here, as I'm stacked up over this sit bone, I have a little energy in this leg that's holding me up. I'm going to stay really long in this breastbone, belly button, pubic line, and I'm going to pull myself forward. And I won't go very far. And you'll feel this somewhere along the length of the back of the leg. For some people, they feel it in the hip itself. That's probably more the hip capsule. Some people will feel it along the thigh, or maybe it's behind the knee, or maybe behind the calf or down towards the foot. Some people even feel it at the bottom of their foot. So somewhere along the length of this posterior or back side that is being elongated. There is the push. Here it is from the side. Here's the push that allows me to stack up and over. And as you can see, as I pull forward, that's about all I have, okay? When you see someone doing this movement and they can lay all the way over like this, I would be concerned that they are not quite captured yet those three components. Because when you get all three components, like I said, harmoniously aligned, you translate the motion to right here in the hip joint, right? We start to allow the pelvis to move over the thigh bone in the way that mimics walking. And you'll hold that for about 3 to 5 seconds. There's no magic number here. And then we back off. And we'll start it all over again. So I sit forward to the front of the chair. Find a good place where my foot presses down and I'm stacking up over the extended leg. I can put my hand underneath my sit bone and I can kind of just pass through. My flesh is still there because I'm kind of a big girl and I have some extra fat back there, but I can still get a sense bony wise I'm lifted up over here and I'm bearing weight on this sit bone. I can see from my own camera angle that I am curvilinear rather than tipped. And right now, I just start to pull my shoulder blades together and make this suggestion that I am coming forward over my thigh. And then try it again. Extend the leg. Press the foot that lifts and stacks the sit bone over the extended leg. Take the tension, make sure the tension is out of the belt. My foot is flexed at 90 degrees. My heel does not leave the floor. It stays right there on the floor. And I'm going to pull myself up and over. I stay as tall as I can when I'm bending forward. Holding 3, 4, 5, 6, and then backing off, releasing my sit bones, releasing the strap, and pausing there. So that's the essence of the seated strap stretch. So now come to standing. And let's go back to that pre-assessment. First of all, just notice the leg that you chose was the one that had a heavier footprint into the floor. Has that evened out for you? Is that different? If you were assigning the amount of weight that was over here before, maybe it was 60-40, 70-30. Has that shifted? Has the other side been able to have a little bit more imprint into the ground? The second part of that assessment is that we were looking at the foot in itself. Remember, we had toes, we also had a ball of the foot, and we had a heel of the foot. And I was asking you to notice what portion of the weight was on your heel, and that heel was very long, compared to the ball of the foot. If your toes were really heavy and you felt more of the weight on the ball, the toes may have dropped down. Is it a little lighter? Is that percentage between the ball and the heel, is that a little more 50-50 or maybe 40 in the ball and a little more into the heels? And maybe If you were that type of person who was really bearing weight on the outside edge of the heel when you were standing, the outside edge of the foot, maybe that shifted as well. Great. All right, so that's going to end our movement exploration of the seated strap stretch. You're absolutely welcome to do it on the other side and explore that for you. In the next part of the video, we'll be talking a little bit more about those anatomical and biomechanical gems that I like to review with you, and how the three components of that seated strap stretch is what makes the difference between just stretching a muscle out or doing a movement that translates into function. Again, we are trying to not only reestablish healthy gait patterns, but we're really trying to highlight, call back these missing interdependent parts, or what we would like to call gait or gateways, that open you up to more usable information in the body, so that unconsciously the nervous system knows that it's available and it can take the motion at certain points or joints and turn them back towards that level of function that has been missing. So let's have a look at those anatomical and biomechanical pearls and why this seated strap stretch matters. You know, often we don't appreciate what we have until it's gone. And that's the same thing that happens with the sweetness and effortlessness of being able to move from sit to stand without having to use your hands or be able to shift your weight over onto one foot in order to stand upright. And for sure, the unconscious ability to spontaneously shift your center of mass or your pelvis over one leg that allows you to take a next step. We don't even realize that all those elements are happening until it's gone. And the amount of pain and dysfunction that is silently occurring in the background doesn't reach our conscious awareness until it hits a certain threshold. So it's important to me to share with you why this movement matters at least once a week, figuring out how to do this in your day. Throughout your day, this can be done at a kitchen table chair or a desk chair. And eventually, once you understand the three components, you won't even really need a strap in order to do the movement. So let's take a look at why this matters. It might be obvious for people who are in the healthcare profession or the wellness profession. It may be obvious for them to see why this movement might be helpful, as it can potentially relieve these chronic patterns of knee compression. But for the layperson doesn't realize that the thigh bone itself, the end of the thigh bone, is the knee, but the top of the thigh bone is the hip. So whatever is going on at either end is very impactful upon the other. So we could use one end to also help the other relieve this kind of compression. The other thing the layperson doesn't realize, and Cynthia Allen talks about this in another one of our movement exploration videos that has to do with awakening the hip extensor, is that the length of the inside of the thigh bone, the knee, it's this area right in here. Most people don't realize that that inside aspect of the knee itself is much longer than the outside. That is why people end up having horrible arthritic changes. Chronic compression in this area, give it 10 to 20 years, is going to turn into something that will undoubtedly end up as a new knee or total knee replacement. It's the cartilage here that gets worn off. It's a really thin covering as opposed to the cartilage that is also called meniscus, or that lies in between the two bones, the shin bone or the tibia and the thigh bone or the femur. They are sandwiched in there, and this meniscus or menisci provide a container or a socket for the ball of the end of the femur to fit into. Most people don't realize that the ability to stand upright longer is not just muscular strength, it's skeletal alignment. So we're not just improving range of motion at the ankle joint or the knee or the hip, we're distributing it along a longer surface area. And most importantly, most people don't understand that the length of the foot also can contribute to being able to stand longer. So when you are more appropriately spreading out the weight distribution of the foot along with the distribution from the ankle to the hip and into the spine, then it gets easier in the system to stand because you're not really using muscular effort to stand. Not, at least not in the large muscles themselves, the large movers. Your small stabilizers you do, but you also have this ability to skeletally, you're being decompressed in the joints so that there's not this sense that it is getting worn out or that you're getting real tired and the effort is there to stand up. Now, these next two reasons why it matters, as you see here, your ability to restore the knee-lumbar connection and your ability to improve your standing on one leg. Now, that's obvious with walking, right? You have to stand on one leg in order to advance the next one, and the same cycle repeats itself over again. But it's also for standing on one leg doing any type of exercises, whether they be in yoga or balance training. Those all would be markedly influenced by this. In healthy gait patterns of walking, and I dare say in all function, we are always inviting back this sense of neutrality of the lumbar spine. Just being upright and unconscious to how the lumbar spine itself can move and its potential plays a huge role in many disease processes and comfort level. So we want to take a closer look here at the lumbar spine itself. Remember, the lumbar spine is this area where we can place our whole hand. It's at the same level of where the pelvis, the top of your pelvis is. These last 5 vertebrae are lumbar. So if we take a closer look, let me show you where often compression in the lumbar spine is and where we would like to shift that compression. Because neutrality here means 2 different things to different schools of education. In physical therapy, we think of neutrality as being able to have this normal in-curve that exists. It's not too excessive and it's not too flat, all right? So mechanically, we're looking to, when we sit up on our sit bones, right at the peak of our sit bones, our pelvis is level is flat. It's not tipped forward and it's not tucked underneath us. It just sits flat. And then there's this natural curve, incurve that exists. They call it lumbar lordosis. So lordosis means is a fancy term for this incurve. Well, when we have that sense of neutrality, then weight bearing is born on the front part of the vertebra. These are very thick areas. And the thickness here allows for compression and decompression to go through in these areas. This is also the area where we get, or labeled as osteoporotic. So we want weight bearing. We want walking to be shifted right here along the front part of your lumbar spine. In contrast to, and what's happening with most people, is that it gets shifted back here along the back aspect of the lumbar spine. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer and remind you about how these lumbar spines are faceted together, fastened, or we call these facets, or the name of these joints. And this is where we often see the bulk of arthritis and the narrowing that happens within the space between the two vertebrae where they stack up and where the nerve exits. And this is where we would call stenosis, either at the side of the nerve or along the center or the central canal, and that's where the spinal cord is. So once again, this part here in the front, we actually cannot touch this. These are the bodies of the vertebra. This is where we bear weight. As one vertebra stacks up on another vertebra, they're separated by an intervertebral disc. And as one vertebra, this is one vertebra, stacks up on the next vertebra, they are connected via this joint. And this joint is called a facet. It's here where there's excessive compression that goes on. You can see that there's designed to be some space in this area. So when we get too much incurve, that space gets compressed and it causes rubbing in this area. This is a joint just like your knee joint. So it can get inflamed with the capsule or the covering around it. It can get arthritis. It can signal pain that refers pain back into this area here, which is called the sacrum, or most people would call the tailbone, but that's the tailbone. So this all along here has too much compression, and ideally this does not have enough. So when we talk about the knee and lumbar connection, it's very interesting. These movements here along the facet bend forward and back just like the knee motion. So the forward and backward bending in the lumbar spine, where you have backward bending, you have more incurve. Forward bending, you have less incurve. That movement there in the spine is the same movement as when the knee bends and straightens. So they move in what we would call the same plane of motion. So you see that the more a person can hyperextend at the knee, and this is one of the reasons why in that second component we were really focusing in on being able to keep the knee in what we would call stacked or neutral to your best capability, not hyperextended, because as you hyperextend the knee, especially in standing, what that's going to do is it's going to tilt the pelvis forward, and that gives you more incurve here. So if you're taking 10,000 steps a day, 5,000 of those steps are putting excessive wear and tear in the lumbar spine as well as the inside of the knee. It is very rare, and I dare say I've never seen it, that you would have someone who has worn out the inside of their knee who does not have lumbar spine changes. So I know that as we can change the influence of what's happening at the knee by changing what's happening at the ankle, because remember, the bottom of the knee is really the top of the ankle, same bone, and improvement up at the hip joint moving is just the same bone as the top of the knee. So anytime you improve these two ends, you begin to improve the middle of the knee, but you also then start to improve what's happening here at the spine. So that connection is intimately married together. So let's go to that last aspect of being able to actually stand on one leg. The main component there was in our third aspect of the seated strap stretch. Up to this moment, that movement of being able to lasso the foot and being able to pull yourself forward, staying really long, you absolutely are getting movement of the pelvis itself over a hip joint. Let me show you that from a different perspective with a different moving model. So here you're in that seated position, the leg is extended, and I'm asking you to stay nice and tall and keeping that line in front of you, that breastbone, belly button, pubic bone line really long. When I have you keep that long, I am ensuring just the neutrality or the natural incurve of the lumbar spine, okay? We have another movement exploration that calls that forward. So when we're in this posture and I'm sitting on that sit bone and you are able to move forward by pulling yourself on the strap, at this time both hip joints are moving. The socket itself moves over a fixed ball. The socket moves over a fixed ball. And that's what's really important that we are restoring. You'd be surprised at just that movement alone would be helpful. But I really want to come back to why seated strap stretch is so unique. And it's this aspect of being able to allow the pelvis itself to be able to side tilt. So that as you see here, when you begin to stack up and over onto the sit bone, you are not just leaning over like the Tower of Pisa. What you're really doing is you're hiking the pelvis up on one side. You're tilting it. And just like a teeter-totter, if you have one end that is moving up and the other end that's moving down, then in that teeter-tot moment, you have shifted your center of mass over to one side. And it's the shifting and the control of the center of mass that is super important. I want you to think of this whole pelvis area. I want you to think of this as command central. So you are literally taking your command central and you're moving it over to one side, stacking the socket over one ball, moving now that socket over that stationary ball. And that's what it's like when you're standing and walking. It's one component or plane of motion. But you start to control that, then you really will have a handle on being able to stand on one leg much more efficiently, and the exercises that you do will translate and targeted the strengthening of the muscles that you're hoping to, rather than just being able to translate the center of mass over. The brain already knows how to do that. So that's why the seated strap stretch is super important. And that is the big pearl that I learned for myself when I was going through my own rehab. It's the difference that increased my rate of recovery, and it's something that I wanted to pass on to you all, and that's why it is in our Gait for Human Potential series. So I hope you enjoyed this video series and this section in particular, and please find time to do this at least once a week. You'll be very surprised. All right, thank you.